G'day everyone, my name is Hoi. Let me show the power of BlendIf. First, I'm going to explain what it is, and then I'm going to show you through several use cases so you can see it in action, in the wild if you like. And then I'm going to show you an alternative method of luminosity masking using BlendIf. Now, because it's dynamic, it's my preferred way of luminosity masking. If you stick around after that, I'm also going to preview a super duper way to make this collage using BlendIf and other tools. So if you want to follow along, the links to the images are in the description. The first question that you might have is, what is BlendIf and why are we looking at this weird graphic in front of us? Well, this weird graphic is what I'm going to be using to explain what BlendIf is. The first step to using BlendIf is to open up a layer style menu. So there's two ways you can do that. One is to double click on the side of your layer. Just be careful not to double click on the name of the layer, otherwise you'll be renaming that. So double clicking on that, and your layer style menu will come up, and this is the BlendIf section. The other option is to come down to FX on your layers panel and click on the first one, blending options, and that will give us exactly the same menu. This is the BlendIf section that we're interested in, and there are three things to consider when using the BlendIf sliders. The first one is, which channel are you going to use? By default, it's got the gray layer. And what the gray layer is, it just deals with the luminosity of that layer. It's the combination of the red, green, and blue layers combined. So we're going to walk through a use case using blue to get rid of the sky and replace it. So once we know how to use the blue channel, we'll know how to use the other channels as well. So here we've got the current layer and the underlying layer. So let's start off with understanding what the current layer does. So let's just move this out the way. So the current layer is the layer that I've got selected, which is this one in my case. The underlying layers are all these layers that are underneath the selected layer. Now just make sure that you've got your visibility turned on for all your underlying layers if you want the effect, the BlendIf effect, to apply to it. So let's walk through what the current layer does. So let's just play around with these sliders. So click and drag, and you can see that it's kind of made something disappeared, right? And now we can see the underneath this current layer here. So let's do that on this side as well. So click and drag, and now the other side is disappeared. So what's happening here? So to understand this, what's happening here, we've got to understand what this bar is doing. Well, pixels have a total range between 0 and 255, 0 being black and 255 being white here. So by me moving the slider towards the center, what it's saying is that from a total range between 0 and 34 here, that is going to disappear or be removed from my current layer. And because my current layer is this radial gradient here, it's going to make those tones disappear. Now if I do it on the highlight side, the white side, click and drag, similarly, what it's saying is that from tones from 215 to 255, those ranges from the current layer, from the layer that I've got selected, will disappear. And because it disappears, I can see what's underneath that, the underlying layers. Now you can see here that the lines are pretty straight. And what that means is that the transition between what appears and what doesn't appear is pretty harsh. It's either on or off. And we can feather that if we want to. With these sliders, you can break them apart by pressing Option or Alt on the keyboard and then click once here. That will break it apart. And then if I just move the right slider, you can see that it's transitioning, right? So it's not completely disappeared before it becomes 100% visible. I can do it on the other side as well. Click and drag it all the way to somewhere like this. So let's just explain what's happening here. So again, between 0 and 34, that tonal range of my current layer has disappeared. So you won't see those black in this current layer. But between a tonal range of 34 to 76, that will gradually transition from gone or remove to slowly appearing until it hits 76 and beyond, and then that will become visible again until it hits this mark here. On the white side or the highlight side, it's a similar explanation. From 255 to 215, the tonal range have disappeared, and then from 215 to 160, that will gradually go from disappeared to appearing, and then from 160, it will appear again. Now, let's just reset this all the way here, and I want to show you a funny thing that happens when I cross these sliders over. So just watch this. I'm going to cross it over, and suddenly I get my circular pie graph back, right? So I'm going to cross that, and then I'm going to just move the black one over here. So what this means is that from here, a tonal range of 0 to 188, that actually shows, instead of disappearing, the darkest tonal range from here to here shows, and we can see that we can verify it on the image here. And then on the other side, from 255 to 51, that also shows here. So what's disappeared is between here. This only happens when we cross over these tabs here. So the normal application is that between here and here is disappearing. So now that we've got a better idea of what the current layer does, let's go through what the underlying layer does. Now, I'm going to cancel out of this, and I'm just going to use the colored layer here because that will demonstrate it a little bit better in my opinion. Remember to bring up the BlendIf options, double click on the side of the layer here. Underneath this layer is this linear gradient here, this band, small band here, as well as the fence, as well as the background here. I'm going to click and drag, and something weird is happening, right? So click and drag, and it doesn't quite do what the current layer does. So it's not disappearing this tonal range from here to here or to here to here. What it's doing, it's saying, okay, the underlying layers, which is here, here, and here, these tonal ranges between 0 to 84, these pixels will push up from the underlying layer to show on your current layer. So let's just play around with the sliders just to cement what I mean a little bit more. So if I go all the way back here, you see that the linear gradient behind this, if I just move this to the right again, the linear gradient behind this, we can't see it because it's underneath this top layer here. But what I'm telling it to do is that so long as you've got a tonal range of a 0 to 74, let's push those pixels up onto the current layer. So this is why that you see the linear gradient pushing up. Now, not only the linear gradient is pushing up, it's also happening on the fence effect. So the dark point being, say, for example, this gap in between the fence here, it's also pushing up through the top layer, and I can see the effect here. So instead of disappearing as you would have in your current layer here, the way to think about it is that from here to here, the pixels or the tonal range that will push up through the underlying layer so you can see it on the top layer. Similarly, you can do it on the right hand side or the highlight side. So from tonal range between 255 to 189, that will push through from your underlying layers up to the top, so long as you've got your tonal range between them. So if I exaggerate all the way there, I can make the top layer, which is the circular color gradient here, disappear. So in summary, when you click and drag from the current layer, the gap between here and your tab is what will make it disappear. Whereas if you do the same thing for the underlying layer, what it's saying is that any tonal range in your underlying layers will push up through and then will reveal itself on the top layer. If that's still a little bit too confusing, you can always rewind the video and just watch it again. But the good news is we're going to go through a number of use cases so you can see and cement the knowledge in your mind. Okay, so the first example that we're going to do is a pretty simple one. We're going to just ease ourselves in. Here I've got this pretty worn out fence, and I'm just going to type in something. I'm going to press T on the keyboard to bring out my text tool, and I'm just going to do hello. And I'm going to press escape or press this check mark to accept the changes. let's press Command or Control T to bring up our transform control handles, and let's just stretch this out to a size that we can see it properly. So something like this. Press Return or Enter to accept that. Now this looks pretty unrealistic, right? If our objective is to kind of blend this into as if it's faded with the fence, right? So we can use the power of BlendIf. So remember, double click on the side of your hello layer. And what we're going to do is use the underlying layer. We want both the shadows to come through. So we want the gaps to come through so you can see the gap through the letters, as well as we want the highlights to come through so we can see the peeling paint. So remember, the current layer is this one, and then the underlying layer is this. Because we want the effect of the fence to come through, we're going to use the underlying layer. We're going to just use this as starters. So let's click and drag. And you can see straight away that the darker areas from the underlying layer is pushing through up to the current layer, so we can see the effects underneath that, right? So the effect is a little bit harsh. So what we want to do is split this tab. So Option or Alt on the keyboard, click and drag it to something like this. So that's a good start. Now we want the highlights of the fence to come through as well. So let's click and drag this towards the center, and you can see that the cracks in the paint, the white cracks in the paint, is coming through too. Now the effect is pretty harsh, the outline is harsh. So let's click on Option or Alt to break this tab apart, and then just bring this to the center, and something like this is already looking great. So let's press OK. So to go back to edit, you can always double click on the side of it and then adjust it like so. Okay, so for the next example I've got here is a VW masked out on this background here. You can see that it's a little bit unrealistic because I haven't brought in the shadow here. That's why it looks a little bit like it's floating on the ground. Now, we're not going to worry about perspective and matching the color, etc. I do have a separate dedicated video on this. Check out the links in the description. What I want to show you in this tutorial is using BlendIf to bring in the shadow. Luckily, the original shadow, if I press Shift and click on this, is accompanied in the original image here. So whenever you have an original shadow, you want to use that instead of recreating it, because that will give you the most realistic effect. So what I'm going to do is replicate this. I'm just going to turn on the mask again and then press Command or Control J. I don't want this mask here, so let's just trash this. And I'm going to get my lasso tool here and do a quick lasso of the shadow here. I've just missed this bit in. Shift on my keyboard as I use this selection tool. And something like this, you can see that it's not perfect, but I don't need to be with this technique. So now that I've got this selection, I'm going to press on the mask button to make a mask, and here I've got the mask that I wanted. Now obviously I don't want the other bits with it because it's looking a little bit unrealistic. Now I can obviously take the time to painstakingly manually brush this out, but you know, who's got the time for that? And there's a better way. So the better way is to bring up our BlendIf option. So double click on the side of the layers here. Whoops, not the name of it. That will bring up our layer styles. And what we want to do is remove the brighter bits from the current layer here. So this slider is what we want to use. So click and drag so it disappears the brighter areas, leaving only the dark areas. And just like that, it is removing the other bits on the ground, right? The lighter bits. But if I zoom in a little bit more, you can see that the edges are quite harsh. So remember our nifty trick, we can feather the transition by pressing Option or Alt on the keyboard, click, and then just bring this tab to the left. So I can also bring that to the left, and then you can finesse it however you like and press OK. And then if I zoom out a bit, Command or Control 0, and that is my shadow. Before, after, before, after. For this example, we're going to remove the blue sky. There are a number of ways you can do it, but one of the easiest way is probably using BlendIf. Now, before we do that, let's show you my layer stack. So the first layer is this tree, and then to replace this guy, I'm going to use this one here. So to bring up our BlendIf, let's click on the side of this layer, the trees layer, double click on that. And the first thing that we want to do is change the gray channel, which deals with luminosity. We're going to change that from gray to blue. So you can see that this layer here, or this bar here, I should say, has changed from black to blue. So how do we interpret that? The way we interpret it is that where this is blue, that's where most of the blue reside. It's got a lot of blue in this side of the bar here. On the other side is where there is no blue, where there is black. So because the sky's got a lot of blue, we're going to use this slider here. So if I click and drag, you can see that automatically, well, not automatically, because we change the sliders, right? So if I just do it again, you make these ranges disappear from this edge all the way up to this tab here. And just like that, I can see the alternative sky here. Remember, you can feather then transition. So Option or Alt on the keyboard, click, and then just drag it out like this, and then press OK. Now that already looks okay, but I want to highlight a few things. This isn't true transparency. So even if I click off the sky layer here, it shows transparent. Well, I've got the checkerboard, right? But it's not true transparency, because if I look at the thumbnail, you can still see the blue sky here. So why is that significant? It's significant because if I want to make a layer mask out of this, I can't. So if I command click on the layer, I should get my selection, but the selection is all around the canvas and not my trees here. So it's not true transparency. And the way to get true transparency is luckily very easy. So all we need to do is make a smart object out of this. So just right click on the trees layer and then go to convert to smart object. And now you can see that even the thumbnail here on the layers panel is transparent. So if I try to make a mask out of this, so command click on this, now my selection is on the trees. So if I make a mask here, then my mask is actually this bit here. For this image, I want to apply a sharpening filter on this image. So if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that the hair isn't sharpened, but her face is relatively in focus. So I'm going to use BlendIf to apply the selective sharpening. So let me zoom out a little bit and create a duplicate of the background layer. So Command or Control J on the keyboard. And I'm going to apply a smart object on layer 1 because I want the flexibility of coming back to the filter and changing it. So let's right click on that and go to Convert to Smart Object. Let's go to Filter, Other, and then select high pass filter. So a radius of 5 is okay. This isn't a tutorial on high pass filter, so I'm not going to explain what the radius means. So let's press OK, and then let's change the blend mode from normal to linear light. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that the image has been sharpened. This is before, this is after. You can see that although the effect on the hair is good, I don't want the effect on her face. Now I can mask the effect on her face out, but there's probably a better way, an easier way. And because this tutorial is on BlendIf, guess what? We're going to use BlendIf. Let me zoom back out and let's bring up our layer style menu, double click on that. And we want to bring up the original effect of the face up to the current layer. So what we're going to use is the underlying layer here, and we're going to use the highlight slider here. So just so you can see the effect, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, well, a lot. That looks like, so zoom out a bit and use this layer, this slider, and then just click and drag. You can see that slowly her face, the sharpening on her face is disappearing, right? And because I don't want such a harsh transition, I'm just going to press Option or Alt on the keyboard, click and drag. So then the underlying layer is coming through, leaving the effect on the darker areas. So I'm going to press OK, and let's zoom out again. And this is the before, and then this is after. So just concentrate on the hair before, after, before, after. Now you can see that the eyes have been sharpened as well. So if you don't want that effect, you can always create a layer mask here. So just click on your mask, B on the keyboard to bring up our brush tool, and then with black as our foreground color, you can just paint that out. Now the other use case of BlendIf on this model is just to put an extra shine on her hair. You can see that the lights are around her. So let's just create another layer here. So I've still got my brush tool selected. If you don't have your brush tool selected, B on the keyboard, and then let's press Option or Alt on the keyboard to bring up our eyedropper tool, and then just sample a color, a light color outside, something like this. And then I'm just going to dab maybe a couple of times here just to simulate the light here. Now this is an awful reflection, no doubt, but that's because we haven't changed the blend mode. So I'm going to change it from normal to maybe overlay or maybe soft light. Maybe soft light is the way to go, but this effect is still a good effect, but it's applying it to everywhere. It's applying to the dark areas and the light areas. What we want to do is just apply it to the light areas. And guess what? We can do that via the BlendIf options. Let's double click on the side of the layer here. And what we want to do is from the underlying layer, we want the dark pixels to punch through. Use the underlying layer, click and drag. You can see her hair, the effect on her hair as we drag it. Now we want a smoother transition. So press Option or Alt, click and drag, and you can see that this is the effect that I've come up with. So okay, and then this is the before and after, before and after. If you made it this far, well done to you. And I've got a real treat for you because I'm going to show you how to use BlendIf to create luminosity mask in a dynamic way. Yep, you heard me right. So if you know how to create luminosity mask using the traditional way of intersecting channels multiple times, you know how time consuming it can be, and it may not create the channel that you're after. I've got a detailed walkthrough of different ways of creating luminosity mask using channels, color range, and the BlendIf method. So if you want a detailed walkthrough, check out the link in the description. This is a high-level summary. Just assume that we want to change the color of the mist here or the fog here. I'm going to create a hue saturation layer for that. So let's go to our adjustment layer, create our hue saturation layer. And what we want to do is bring up our layer style menu here. So double click on the side of the layer. And the first thing that we want to do is visualize where our effect will be. So to do that, let's click on color overlay. Let's click on the name, not the checkbox, because if you only check the checkbox, you apply your existing settings, which may or may not be what you want. So to bring up the settings of the color overlay, let's click on the name, and then this will bring up the options here. So what you want to do is select the color that isn't present in your image here. So I know that magenta doesn't seem to be in my image, so I'm going to select magenta or a color close to it and then press OK. The next step is to go to our blending options, and then we're going to use our BlendIf sliders. And what we're interested in is the underlying layer here. This is the underlying layer in relation to the hue saturation layer. So what we want is the dark areas to punch through to the current layer. So what we want to do is to move this tab here from the left to the right, and you can see that the dark areas are punching through. What's left then is the effect. Now the reason why we chose the magenta overlay is so now we can see that the effect will be applied in the magenta area. Now before we accept this change, let's just smoothen the transition because this is a little bit too harsh. So let's press Option or Alt on the keyboard to split this tab, and then we can smoothen this out, and something like this looks okay. Now the brilliant thing about this method for luminosity masking is that I don't need to be 100% accurate at this stage. I can always come back to it and change it. So for the time being, I'm going to accept that, press OK, and now we can visualize our effect here. So the color overlay We don't need that anymore. We know where it's going to be affected. I'm going to turn off the effect, and that will bring us back to the original image. Now, when we want to change the color, I can just go to my hue slider and then just slide it about. Now, if I'm not happy with the range of the luminosity mask, I can always double click on the side of the layer and then adjust my BlendIf sliders. Look at that, you see? In a dynamic way. I don't need to go to the channels panel and then make another channel and intersect another thing. So it's a lot easier. And if you don't know what I meant by all that, don't worry, you can always watch the detailed explanation in the description down below. So let's click on OK to accept that. Now, you can see that the trees are also a little bit too dark. Now I can use BlendIf to lighten that, right? So to lighten the image, what I can do is use my curves adjustment layer, and whoop, it's up here. And then let's bring up our layer style menu so we can use our wonderful BlendIf sliders. So again, let's create the color overlay so we can visualize where the effect's going to be. Let's go to blending options, and this time we want the light areas from the underlying areas to punch through to the top, leaving the affected areas in magenta. So something like this. And I'm just going to split it Optional Alt, so something like that. So remember, the magenta area are the areas that's going to be affected. I'm going to press OK, and now that we can visualize the effect, I don't need to see the color overlay effect anymore. So just turn that off, and with my curves in my properties panel, I can just increase the curve to brighten it however I like. You see that? So take the time if you're doing this for real. So this is really a quick effect that I'm applying, which may not be exactly what I'm after, but you get the picture. Because you made it this far, I want to give you a preview of what BlendIf is still capable of. Now, this is a collage that I made using a number of techniques, but one of the main engines behind this effect is BlendIf. So I started off with this image here, and then I applied a number of adjustments. So if I use my levels, you can see that it's dynamically changing the way that the collage is shown. One of the tools of controlling this is using the BlendIf technique on the textures. So I've just double click on that, and you can see that by changing the BlendIf sliders, I am changing the effect that it's having on the image. But that is for another tutorial because this video is already long enough. So if you want me to walk you through how I created this collage using BlendIf and other tools, let me know about it in the comments. So that is the power of BlendIf. If you enjoyed this video, or if you saw some use cases that you haven't seen before, let me know about it in the comments section below. Like this video, subscribe, or hit the bell icon so you can get notified for when my next video is out.